John McMullen, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider, national columnist for FanRagSports.com, joins us every day at this hour. There was football last night between the Chiefs and the Patriots, and, of course, the game that we have our eyes on all week long, the Redskins and the Eagles, a Sunday 1 o'clock kickoff from FedEx Field. Doug Peterson did speak today to the media. We'll get into that with John, plus find out a little bit about last night's game as well and his thoughts on the Chiefs and the Patriots. Who saw that coming? If you're Mike Gill, of course you saw that coming, but if you're me, you're a little surprised, that's for sure, as the Chiefs come out and put a whooping last night on Tom Brady and the Pats, winning that game on national television. Eagles, Redskins, Sunday. Line pretty close on this one. The pundits and the matchup prognosticators, if you will. Casey Joyner, we talked to, had the Eagles winning this game, but the line is pretty close. John McMullen will be there in attendance at FedEx Field. He joins us now here live on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. John, happy Friday to you, sir.
And happy Friday to you, Peter.
Doing well, buddy, on a Friday. It's absolutely gorgeous. I do hope that you got outside for at least a little bit of today, and I know you've got a big weekend ahead of you as you follow this football team with, quite frankly, more questions than answers right now. Questions were answered yesterday, and let's start with that. The Jeffrey Lurie press conference that came late in the show. We only had you on for a couple of seconds. It seemed like too quick for my liking, John. I like more John than less John. But any more takeaways after that seasoned in with you or resonated a little bit from the Jeffrey Lurie press conference yesterday?
Yeah, I think some of the more interesting parts were after the public part of the press conference, when Jeffrey kind of stuck around and held courts. And one thing he addressed was Doug's propensity to sort of go for it on fourth down a lot and his aggressiveness. And he tried to shield the coach a little bit there by saying most of those things are analytically based, and you have a book sort of like a baseball manager looking at numbers, and that makes the decision for you. And Doug kind of was asked that question today, and it's part that, and it's also part of feel for the game. And I know there's a new breed of fan that believes in analytics, above all else, that doesn't like to hear terms like gut and things like that. But I do think you have to have a feel for a game, and that's one of the most important parts of being a coach. And I think Doug is feeling his way through that, as all first-year coaches do.
Year number 2 of Doug Peterson, and one of the things, and I laughed about it with you a little bit when we had you on yesterday, when I thought it kind of derailed a little bit as they were talking to Jeffrey Lurie about his relationship with Doug and when they chat. Well, today, Doug Peterson had a chance to sort of talk about those comments and basically describe his interaction with Jeffrey Lurie during the week. How did he describe his relationship with the chairman and chief executive officer?
Well, Jeffrey likes to be involved, and he likes to know what's going on. And I think that piques some people's interest in far as, is the owner telling the coach what to do at times. Obviously, both sides claim that is not the case. But Doug, confirmed they have basically weekly conversations. They can last anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 hours. And I think part of it is that Jeffrey is very, very into this. And that's another thing he said in the portion that wasn't streamed live. It's the fact that he's obsessed with professional football. So I think there's a lot of good to that, to have an owner so involved. There could be some bad because you don't want him making football decisions, but I don't think there's any evidence that Jeffrey forces his football people into making certain decisions, whether it's personnel based or who to play or anything of that nature. That's never been anything that's been told to me behind the scenes, and I just think he's interested in what's going on, and it's his football team.
John McMullen with us, our 90. ESPN Eagles Insider. John's appearance brought to you by Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Visit Gino Pinto on the White Horse Pike in Hamilton. Go online at GinoPinto.com. Geno's, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. John, I'll tell you, usually the Friday before a game weekend, you don't spend 6 to 8 to 10 questions talking about the owner and your relationship with the owner. But because Jeffrey spoke yesterday, I would assume that's why the questioning went that way. When they did get to football-related questions this morning, a lot of it had to do with the offense sputtering at Washington and why the Eagles haven't had success in Washington. What did Doug have to say about the Eagles' past history in Washington and how he thinks they solved that issue Sunday?
Well, I think there's a couple things, really, and it's been obviously the offensive issues, but you can go back to earlier in the week as well, and I think you look at Lane Johnson and the fact that his 10-game PED suspension involved both of the Redskins games, so that was part of it because Washington had 9 sacks against the Eagles last year. Remember the first game was Big V's first NFL start. He did not handle Ryan Kerrigan well. And the second time it was Alan Barber and sort of Matt Tobin as a mix late in the game. It was Matt Tobin missing the block that cost them the football game in essence. So I think the Eagles understand that they're going to be better off the fact that Lane Johnson's out there. And that has such an impact on the offense. Defensively, though, I spoke to Brandon Graham earlier this week, and, you know, the true story of this rivalry and the fact that the Redskins have won 5 straight is Kirk Cousins has really, really dominated the Eagles throwing the football. So the best case scenario for Philadelphia there is obviously to hurry him and get him off his spots and get him uncomfortable, and that's sort of what Brandon talked about. So I think it's a combination. Not just the offense. I think the offensive problems were directly related to the fact that Lane Johnson was not there.
John McMullen with us. John, it's so cliche to talk about that the game is won or lost at the line, but since you talk about the Eagles' game plan most likely being trying to make Kirk Cousins uncomfortable, he's the guy that almost, not single-handedly, but it's really been hurtful to them over the past matchups. Is there an idea that this could come down to the Eagles' defensive line versus a pretty good Washington offensive line, and who wins that battle?
Yeah, it is. It's strength versus strength because you're right about the Redskins. Now, it's interesting. Spencer Long, their starting center, is questionable. He just recently had arthroscopic knee surgery. So that'll be a name to keep an eye on if he's able to play. But the Redskins are a lot like the Cowboys in that they have 3 really, really good players on the offensive line. Both tackles, I would argue that Trent Williams is the best left tackle in football. Brandon Graham called him that. Morgan Moses is a tremendous right tackle. And then you have Brandon Sheriff inside, who's one of the better guards in this league. So it is a very, very strong group. And the Eagles, from their standpoint, they think they have a top 5 defensive line in this league, and I don't disagree with them. I think it is that good. It starts with Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox, obviously, but they've improved it greatly with Tim Jernigan and adding Derek Barnett and Chris Long. They not only have good players now, but they have depth, and that's what Jim Schwartz wants because he loves to rotate his defensive linemen. So they are fresh in the fourth quarter, and if you need that big pass rush on a quarterback like Kirk Cousins, you're more liable to get it with guys who are fresher in their legs and they're not worn out from playing 60 or so snaps.
Before I leave the scenario where the Eagles' defense is on the field going up against the Redskins' offense, the name Jamison Crowder was brought up earlier in the show with Casey Joyner, Mike Gill, and I because Casey Joyner had said he talked to somebody on the Redskins staff that said, we feel we could match up J.C. Crowder. He could do anything against the Eagles' defense. Do you think that's a weapon X, if you will, for the Redskins that the Eagles have to account for?
Yeah, it is, but he's also questionable. He went down with a hip flexor, I think, practice Tuesday, and Jay Gruden said anytime anybody's questionable, It's a concern. I do believe he is going to play, but if he's not 100%, that helps, obviously, because he's a guy who relies on his short area quickness. He's one of those traditional, small, quick guys who are so great in the slot with those option routes, and the Eagles have an issue at that position. They're going to go with Patrick Robinson week 1. I think they're trying to get Dexter McDougal into the system as quickly as possible. I think ultimately he's going to take over that role. But that's certainly a matchup that does not favor the Eagles. Hopefully the hip flexor kind of slows Crowder down there.
So that matchup may not favor the Eagles. How about one that a lot of people do think will favor the Eagles, and that's Zach Ertz at the tight end position going up against DeShazer Everett?
Yeah, I mean, Zach Ertz is I often talk about this with Mike. I don't understand Eagles fans because they're constantly talking about when Zach Ertz is going to break out. And I said, look in the rearview mirror. It's already happened. I don't know. You have to sort of look at the rest of the NFL. I mean, this guy was a top 5 tight end as far as catching the football last season. And he essentially, remember, he had that injury early in the season. Or arguably he would have been in the top 2 or 3. So you don't get much better catching the football than Zach Ertz. And I think he's going to have another very good season. Now, interestingly, the volume might not be as high because the receivers are better. But he's a very impactful player. Interestingly, though, one of the probably 2 or 3 tight ends better than Zach Ertz catching the football is Jordan Reed, and he's on the other side.
John McMullen with us, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider and national columnist for FanRagSports.com. And since you do cover the game nationally, I certainly want to ask you about what took place last night between the Chiefs and the Patriots. Mike Gill has a huge smile on his face today, John, because he accurately predicted that Kareem Hunt would have a successful game. Didn't even sweat it when he had that early fumble. Kareem Hunt last night, my goodness gracious, who saw that coming?
Yeah, I don't think too many. I mean, there was so much talk that the Patriots could go undefeated. That's off the table real quickly. So anytime you have you beat the Patriots in Foxborough, it's a surprise, and then how they beat them, and just the numbers of when they lead in the second half, or when they, I think it was 105-2. When they had a lead at some point in the second half, and the Chiefs were able to just blow their doors off. So you don't see it happen very often in Foxborough. And you got to give Alex Smith a lot of credit. There's a guy, all he does is win football games, and they're always looking to replace him. San Francisco, it was Colin Kaepernick. Now it's Patrick Mahomes. That was one of his best games ever in his career as far as numbers go. So you have to be impressed. And hey, Andy Reid hasn't had a lot of success with Bill Belichick over the years, but you can say that about most coaches. But that was the first time since 1988, Pete, that 2 coaches in the top 10 in all-time wins matched up in the same game. So that kind of tells you where Andy is.
John McMullen on 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles insider, also covers the NFL for FanRag Sports. John, it's interesting because last night the Chiefs put over 40 points on the Patriots. In the last 65 games, that's only twice that an opponent has scored more than 40 points. That was also the Chiefs. That was also the year they went to Arrowhead. They got crushed. They went on to win the Super Bowl. So, is some of this maybe just that the Chiefs have a very good game plan for the Patriots in the regular season?
Well, the Chiefs are a very good team. I mean, that's number one. They won 12 games last year. They've been basically an annual playoff team since Andy's gotten there. So that's part of it. They're very good. Part of it is the injuries on New England's side of the football, and the injuries that happened in that game, because when Donta Hightower went out defensively, Danny Amendola went out offensively. They were really up against it, and things kind of fell apart from there. So that added to it. And then overall, I mean, that front seven with New England there's just not a lot of talent there. There really isn't. And you mentioned the points. The yardage, I think it ended up being 537, somewhere around there. That's the most the Bill Belichick defense has ever given up. So it's not good when you look at that Patriots front seven from a talent perspective. Now, that said, they play in the AFC East, which is a dreadful division. There's going to be plenty of wins on their schedule. I wouldn't count them out just yet.
Hey, John, there was news that came out this morning. My girlfriend says to me, "Oh, did you hear about John Dorenbos?" And I said, "What?" And she was reading some stuff on Twitter that just broke this morning around 10 or 10:30. And what's the latest with ex-Eagle John Dorenbos and how it may affect the current Eagles?
Well, a very serious situation. He's found with an aortic aneurysm, so he's going to need surgery. And obviously it goes far beyond football now. And everyone's very concerned from both standpoints, New Orleans and Philadelphia. And you have to see how serious it's going to be. But it's now looking that John's football career is likely over. And because it was a pre-existing condition, the Saints are looking to rescind the trade, which is not that big of a deal, but especially when you look at the larger ramifications. But you do have to mention that from a football standpoint. So they got a seventh-round pick in 2019. That's probably going to go away. But as I said, the far more important aspect of this is hopefully John's okay.
So crazy news out of New Orleans this morning as they come out and talk about John Dorenbos and his health issues. Yes, life issues are probably more important than football issues at this point, but we are talking football with John McMullen. He's our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider. He'll be at FedEx Field on Sunday for Eagles and Redskins. You know, we had Todd Archer on that before you came on. He covers the Cowboys, John, talking about Dak Prescott and would he see a sophomore slump. And one of the names he brought up as guys that weren't as good in year two as they were in year one was RG3. Just makes me think about Carson Wentz, and do you think he will regress or progress in year number two?
Yeah, I think he's going to progress, and I think Dak Prescott's going to progress as well. I don't like that comparison of RG3 because RG3 was coming off a horrible injury, torn ACL, torn LCL. And that more than anything precipitated his downfall because he was spectacular as a rookie, and he got injured in the playoff game against Seattle. So I think that had more to do with his downtick than anything else. Whereas obviously Carson and Dak are very healthy, and they've learned from what they went through in their particular seasons. Interestingly, from Dak's standpoint, I think he's going to progress, but it might not show up as far as numbers or wins because I don't think the situation around him is as good in Dallas this season, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's not doing his job. So I think people have to keep that in mind.
Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. You know, we touched a little bit on Crowder, John, but the Redskins have more receivers than just him, and the Eagles secondary, such a talking point throughout the entire training camp, and even now still going into game one. Who do you think wins that battle between the always under the microscope Eagles secondary and the Redskins wideouts?
Well, I'll say this. The Eagles have a better chance than they did when this all started. They have improved dramatically by adding Darby and not only Ronald, who's obviously the team's best quarterback, but also eventually Dexter McDougal and even Corey Graham at safety. They've gotten a lot better from where they started training camp by bringing in three different players. So. And from Washington's standpoint, they've had a lot of change. So Deshaun is obviously gone. Pierre Garçon is gone. So they have a whole new group. It starts with Terrell Pryor on the outside, who's very gifted, but he's still raw as a wide receiver. So that enters into it. My one concern would be Terrell's a 6'5" guy. I mean, he's a monster. And he can go up and catch the football. And obviously Ron Darby's doesn't have that kind of length. So that could be an issue on those 50-50 balls. So that's one thing you have to be concerned with.
Okay, John, let's talk turkey. So who wins this game? Why? What's the X factor?
Well, the X factor to me is Lane Johnson. The fact he's there. I mean, it's a big difference. We talk about it all the time. The Eagles were 5-1 with him, 2-8 without him. And 2 of those 8 losses were against the Redskins, and Ryan Kerrigan just destroyed. Whether it was Vitae, Barber, Matt Tobin. Ryan Kerrigan's a very good player, and there are times he's going to get the best of Lane Johnson, but it's not going to be nearly as easy for him. And the games were close last year. The Eagles still had chances to win each of those football games. So I think that's the pendulum theory. He makes the difference. I think the Eagles stop that 5-game losing streak in the series and win the game 24-20.
24-20, says John McMullen. It could be a close game like they've been close in recent history. Johnny Mac, we certainly appreciate you coming on with us and spending a few minutes, and we'll see if your prediction comes right. John McMullen, our 97.3 ESPN insider, national columnist for FanRag Sports. Safe travels, John.
Hey, thank you, Pete.